found it by accident. One torn label, one bad batch. And in 20 minutes, he'd risk everything to stop it. They didn't want to hear it. Delivery deadlines mattered more than what was inside the boxes. So David did the one thing they never expected. Fired in front of everyone. No severance, no thank you. Just a man, a cardboard box, and a decision he refused to regret. One phone call, made from a kitchen table at midnight. Listen to me carefully. He's at the warehouse on Elm. You need to get there now, before it's too late.
2 weeks before the night that changed everything, Sam Whitaker had been a logistics supervisor at Draymore Industries, a job he'd held for 9 years, the kind of steady, unglamorous work that let him keep a roof over his head and raise his 8-year-old son, Charlie, mostly on his own since his wife passed away 3 years earlier. If you've ever had something taken from you that you didn't deserve to lose, this story is for you, and I promise it earns everything by the end. If stories about quiet kindness finding its way back around move you, do me a favor before we start hit like and subscribe, because there are a lot more stories like this one coming. Sam had never been the kind of employee who caused trouble. He showed up early, stayed late when the warehouse needed him, and had built a reputation over nearly a decade as the person other supervisors trusted to fix problems quietly instead of turning them into drama, which was exactly why the accusation, when it came, felt so impossible to believe not just to Sam, but to almost everyone who had ever worked alongside him. A discrepancy had turned up in a shipment manifest inventory that didn't match what had actually left the warehouse, valued at just under $40,000. An internal audit, conducted quickly and without much patience for nuance, traced the paperwork back to Sam's shift and Sam's signature, and within a week, he had been called into a small office, handed a termination letter, and escorted out of a building he had spent 9 years helping run. No criminal charges were filed. There wasn't quite enough evidence for that. But the accusation followed him anyway, whispered through an industry small enough that everyone in it eventually heard everything. 3 separate job interviews in the following month ended the same way. Polite conversation, a promising start, and then silence once someone on the other end quietly checked his references. By the time 2 weeks had passed, Sam had gone from steady logistics supervisor to a man picking up overnight shifts at his cousin's small diner just to keep the lights on, raising Charlie on savings that were disappearing faster than he wanted to admit, and carrying an accusation he had no idea how to prove wrong. The diner, a modest place called Ruthie's on the edge of downtown, wasn't much to look at. A handful of booths, a counter that had seen better decades, a neon sign that buzzed more than it glowed. But it was work, and work was work. And Sam had learned, in the hardest weeks of his life, not to be too proud to take what was in front of him. It was raining hard the night the elderly woman walked in, close to closing. The diner empty except for Sam wiping down the counter and half watching the door out of habit more than expectation. She moved slowly, leaning on a plain wooden cane, wearing a coat that had clearly seen years of wear, her silver hair pulled back in a simple knot, nothing about her suggesting she was anything other than exactly what she appeared to be. An elderly woman caught in the rain with nowhere warmer to be. She lowered herself carefully into a booth by the window, and when Sam approached with a menu, she waved it away gently and, in a quiet, almost embarrassed voice, admitted she didn't have much money with her. Just a small handful of coins she'd counted twice already, hoping they might cover something warm. Sam didn't hesitate. He'd been exactly where hesitation like that lived, close enough to it that he recognized the particular quiet dignity of someone trying not to ask for help they clearly needed. He told her not to worry about the coins, disappeared into the kitchen, and came back a few minutes later with a full plate meatloaf, mashed potatoes, a roll still warm from the oven. The kind of meal his own mother used to make on nights when money was tight and love had to stretch further than the grocery budget allowed. On the house, he told her, setting the plate down gently. Rain like this, nobody should go hungry. She looked up at him for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind her tired eyes, and thanked him quietly, her voice carrying a warmth that seemed almost out of place for a woman who looked, on the surface, like she had very little left to be warm about. Sam didn't think much more of it. He refilled her coffee twice before she finally left, wished her a good night, and closed up the diner an hour later, heading home to relieve the babysitter and check on Charlie, who was already asleep by the time Sam got there, his homework folder still open on the kitchen table. He didn't expect to see the woman again. He certainly didn't expect what happened 3 days later. A black car pulled up outside Ruthie's just after opening, the kind of car that didn't belong on that particular street. Polished and quiet, with 2 assistants stepping out first to open the rear door with the kind of practiced deference that only exists around people used to being deferred to. The elderly woman who stepped out was unmistakably the same woman from 3 nights earlier, the same silver hair, the same tired but sharp eyes, except now she wore a tailored coat that fit like it had been made for her because it had been. And she moved with a quiet, settled authority that had nothing to do with the plain wooden cane she still carried out of habit, rather than necessity. Her name, Sam would learn within the hour, was Eleanor Draymore. The Eleanor Draymore, founder and majority owner of Draymore Industries, the very company that had fired him 2 weeks earlier. Sam found out the truth from his cousin, who ran to the back of the kitchen practically breathless after recognizing her from a magazine cover taped years earlier to the break room wall. A magazine cover nobody had looked at twice in years, because Eleanor Draymore, according to industry rumor, had stepped back from public life almost entirely after a health scare 18 months earlier, rarely appearing anywhere without a driver, a schedule, and a small army of assistants managing exactly who she spoke to and when, which made it all the more strange and all the more real that 3 nights earlier she had walked alone into a small diner in the rain, with nothing but a handful of coins and no idea that the man behind the counter who fed her for free without asking a single question happened to be an employee of her own company, one she had never met, and one whose termination she knew absolutely nothing about, because decisions like that, at a company the size of Draymore Industries, rarely made it anywhere near her desk anymore. Eleanor sat in a booth that morning, the same booth from 3 nights earlier, and asked, quietly, for Sam by name. When he came out from the kitchen, visibly stunned, still wearing his apron, Eleanor studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You didn't know who I was," she said, not quite a question. "You fed me anyway." "You looked like you needed a warm meal," Sam said simply. "Didn't seem like it should matter much beyond that." Eleanor's expression softened into something Sam couldn't quite name. Gratitude, maybe, or something closer to the particular relief of someone who had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from her, finally encountering someone who hadn't wanted anything at all. "I go out alone sometimes," she admitted, "when the walls of that company start feeling like they belong to everyone except me. I wanted, just for one night, to be treated like a person instead of a name on a building." She asked him, gently, what had brought him to Ruthie's, and Sam, with nothing left to lose and no particular reason to hide it from a stranger he assumed he'd never see again, told her the whole story, the shipment discrepancy, the quick internal audit, the termination letter, the interviews that kept ending in silence once his old employer's name came up. He told it without bitterness, mostly, though something in his voice betrayed exactly how much the unfairness of it had cost him over the past 2 weeks. Eleanor listened without interrupting, and when Sam finished, she asked a single, precise question. What was the shift date on the manifest discrepancy? Sam told her. She wrote it down on a small notepad one of her assistants produced instantly, along with Sam's full name and his old employee ID, and told him, in a tone that left no room for doubt, that she would personally have it looked into. Sam didn't let himself hope too much. He had learned, the hard way, that promises from people with power rarely survived contact with the people beneath them who actually controlled the paperwork. But 3 days later, Eleanor Draymore's black car returned to Ruthie's, and this time she came inside carrying a folder herself instead of sending an assistant to deliver it. The audit Eleanor had personally ordered, conducted this time by an outside firm she trusted completely rather than the internal team that had rushed the first one, uncovered exactly what Sam had always known but had never been able to prove. The shipment discrepancy hadn't originated on his shift at all. A warehouse manager 2 levels above Sam, under pressure to hide his own, inventory losses before a quarterly review, had quietly altered shift logs to shift blame onto a supervisor with no history of complaints and, more conveniently, no political capital inside the company to fight back. Sam had been an easy scapegoat precisely because he had spent 9 years being exactly the reliable, uncomplicated employee who would never think to suspect that reliability could be used against him. Eleanor slid the folder across the table toward Sam, along with a formal letter reinstating him a not to his old position, but to a newly created regional operations role with a salary nearly double what he'd made before, a decision Eleanor made personally rather than delegating to anyone who might have quietly resisted it. I built this company on the idea that people who do honest work deserve honest treatment, Eleanor told him, her voice steady despite the emotion underneath it. Somewhere along the way, I let too many people forget I meant it. You didn't know that when you fed me. You just did the right thing because it was the right thing to do. I intend to make sure that's not a mistake you regret. Sam read the letter twice before he trusted himself to speak, and when he finally looked up, Eleanor was watching him with an expression that had nothing to do with business at all, the quiet satisfaction of someone who had spent years surrounded by transactions finally witnessing something that wasn't one. The warehouse manager responsible for the falsified logs was terminated within the week, and word of exactly why moved through Draymore Industries fast enough that nobody in that building ever again assumed Eleanor was as disconnected from the details as her absence from public life had led them to believe. Sam started his new role a month later, and one of the first things he did before his first official day was bring Charlie to Ruthie's for dinner, sitting his son down in the same booth by the window where a tired stranger and an exhausted old woman had once shared a meal that changed both of their lives without either of them fully understanding it yet. I want you to remember something, Sam told Charlie that night, watching rain streak gently down the same window it had 2 months earlier. Kindness doesn't ask who deserves it first. Sometimes the smallest thing you do for someone turns out to matter more than anything you could have planned. Charlie, 8 years old and mostly interested in his mashed potatoes, nodded the way kids do when they're absorbing more than they let on, and Sam let the moment settle quietly around them both, grateful. In a way, he was still learning how to fully hold, for a stranger in the rain who had turned out to be exactly the person who could finally set things right. What that rainy night at Ruthie's ultimately proved was something simple enough to fit on a single line, and true enough to outlast every hardship that came before it. Kindness given without expectation has a way of finding its way back around, and sometimes the smallest, quietest act of decency is the very thing that ends up rewriting an entire story. If this story moved you even a little, that's exactly why we tell them because kindness deserves to be seen, even when it starts as small as a warm plate on a rainy night. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you want more stories like this one, make sure you're subscribed, because there's always another one waiting.